The Batman Who Laughs is going to be my most painful review to date. Everyone, just letting you know that all figures found in this review could be found over at BigBadToyStore.com. Links could be found in the description below, and if you guys use them, they help out the channel quite a bit. So let me get my masochistic tendencies out of the way and get my review started for The Batman Who Laughs. However, there is a bit of a caveat with this figure that I was very intrigued to get kind of my hooks into, no pun intended there, because this is actually, in a very technical sense, a Mortal Kombat 11 McFarlane toys, so to speak, not a DC Multiverse figure. And because of that, the packaging is just a little bit different. You have a slimmer design with the yellow Mortal Kombat 11 aesthetic, and appropriately enough, you actually have Scorpion on the branding of the box. Nothing of Batman Who Laughs found, not even the artwork on the back. You only have the name there at the bottom of the corner, so you really get the sense that this is not necessarily meant to be terribly affiliated with DC or anything related to the superheroics, that it's kind of feeding off of it a little bit. Because if you want to get even more technical, this is supposed to be Noob Saibot wearing the Batman Who Laughs skin that you can download as DLC in the Mortal Kombat 11 video game. And as such, they have to kind of abide by that. So much so that he only comes with a base that's branded with the Mortal Kombat 11 logo, but no trading card this time around. We do have another accessory though that's very akin to Noob Saibot specifically, not so much Batman Who Laughs. So really, when it comes to the core of the figure, this is probably the most Batman Who Laughs aesthetic that you're really going to get. But for the most part, they get that aesthetic beautifully done right. Despite being a skin for Noob Saibot, I would say that for the most part, this is in fact the Batman Who Laughs that you get out of that specific comic book arc, and they did a pretty bang up job. The reason why I say it's painful is because it's quite physically painful to handle this figure, because they were able to get an awful lot of the spikings and very almost teetering on BDSM aesthetic to the Batman Who Laughs kind of design and costume, specifically the spikes that are around the headband here in front of his face. And they actually are sharp enough to damage the fingers. And that's why I meant to say that it's a little bit on the spiky side. These are actually a little bit painful to hurt and to actually touch. So do be careful with that. A little bit of a disclaimer. Same thing goes for the spiky wristband that he's got on his right hand. You can actually feel the pokes of the spikes coming through right there. And the color scheming going on, of course, is going to be predominantly black, but with a little bit of accenting going on right here with the silver amongst the buckles, straps, and chains that you will typically find on a Batman Who Laughs figure. So overall, they're doing a great job of presenting an appropriate Batman Who Laughs look, and I was never in doubt that they were going to get that right, because again, this is McFarlane toys that we're talking about. They always nail it when it comes to that very leathery, pleathery, black aesthetic that McFarlane is always down for. I mean, this is the man who created Spawn, so Batman Who Laughs is really up his alley, and you get that in full force when it comes to the straps, the buckles, the stuff going around here on the shoulder area, which is actually one of my favorite angles of the design of Batman Who Laughs. But also for this figure, specifically for being a Mortal Kombat 11 figure technically and not a DC Multiverse, they actually did an amazing job of being able to carry on over that skin. And you can see a little bit more of that wingature going alongside here, the coat that's kind of going down the torso area and then kind of bleeding and kind of threading over it, almost like a Batman cape, but not necessarily 100% there. But you still see an awful lot of that DNA that McFarlane likes to share with his typical Batman figures. The boots with the different buckles and straps across the shin area there. You even have a little bit of a shin guard amongst the knee area there that's spiking up. And overall, the look of the character, even with a little bit of purple accent going alongside the collar here, is really cool. To me, of course, the standout is going to be that face sculpt, the blood coming out of the mouth, and the way that each individual tooth is etched in there is actually done meticulously. I will probably say they could maybe have done just a little bit of more thickness to the coloring of the red when it bleeds on over to his chin. The ones on his mouth actually looks really well, but it's actually the ones on his chin that I feel could have been made to look just a little darker and a little less candy looking, so to speak. But of course, you can't go full grotesque because after all, this is technically still a figure that's being marketed to 14 plus as the box entails. So overall, the look is pretty dope. I would probably find it a little ironic that despite having the painful punctures of the spikes here amongst the headband, the same cannot be said for the ears. They actually have a tendency to warp because they're much more bendable, made out of this very flexible rubber. So even though they get the chrome paint right, they actually warp very easily. So pulling him out of the box, they were actually pressed down because of the way that the plastic was molded, the actual translucent plastic inside that was holding the figure. So you kind of have to take your finger or even a hot air blow dryer and kind of flex them out and flesh them out so that they look a little pointier to that of the character. But overall, I am really in love with this design. And frankly, he was doing the job for me. So I thought to myself, okay, let's make sure that this is not just a figure that looks awesome, but also plays awesome as far as articulation is entailed. And I'll be damned if I say he's checked all the right boxes for me as far as articulation, which again is so far summing up for me probably one of my favorite surprises out of the year so far, specifically for it to not come out directly from the DC Multiverse line. That's probably one of the things that just kind of threw me for a loop. The head is able to fully rotate 360 degrees, even though you are going to have to nudge it a little bit upwards because you have an awful lot of the rubbering and the pieces of the hood kind of coming into contact with the collar, but they're flexible. They're made out of flexible rubber, so you are going to be able to push them beyond those limits and not really come into any contact that dictates any form of warping. Just be careful with, again, the ears. But more so than that, he is able to not only look almost all the way up, like it's actually one of the more flexible neck joints that I've seen have the head go almost all the way up, like so, but then he's able to crunch inwards and slightly pivot forwards to kind of give him a much more hunched and menacing look. I mean, that's definitely something you need a nail for a character like Batman Who Laughs. So it's cool that they still threw an awful lot of flexible mobility inside the neck joint, especially when it comes to tilting the head. If you want to make sure that your Batman Who Laughs looks menacing and scary, you gotta give him the head tilt, and they were able to nail that. So that's a definitive plus for me. When we get to the shoulders, we get into some more interesting areas because even though the arms are able to fully rotate 360, you got to be careful a little bit because of the way that the shoulder pieces of the actual costume here are designed. So you kind of have to slant them slightly. But as you notice, you'll easily see that the arms are now slouching downwards very, very easily. That's because there's an awful lot of shrugging motion going alongside the shoulders that this makes it one of the more flexible arms to have ever graced my channel as far as McFarlane Toys is concerned. Now, this could cause a bit of a dividend amongst the community because I can see someone being turned off by how flexible and free-flowing these arms are. In fact, from certain angles, I guess you could argue that Batman Who Laughs here looks a little awkward when the arms go almost all the way down like so, especially if it wasn't for the tunic and all of these things going alongside here of the costume. If it wasn't for these rubberized pieces, I will then make the argument that, yeah, the inside part would probably look a little awkward if this wasn't covering and kind of shadowing that whole entire area from looking very displaced and weird. But outside of that, you're able to shrug the arms downwards and upwards like so. Very free-flowing and almost all the way around in a swirling motion. And of course, you are, because of that, able to fully extend them all the way upwards at a 90-degree angle. So that was never going to be a problem. But they're never loose to the point where they don't stay in place. They always manage to stay snug in place. So your mileage may vary, but for me, I actually really like the movement and the shrugging motions of these arms. And plus, this is Batman Who Laughs. He's supposed to be an unnatural force of freak of nature. So unnatural arms like so to make him look even much more intimidating, especially if you're happy to be a stop motion animator, this will probably come in handy. Just saying. Then you do get some bicep swivels. Because of how free-flowing those shoulders are, they are going to be a little tough to rotate without having the entire arm rotating in place because of that shoulder joint. But the biceps are swivels inside of there that are able to rotate 360 degrees, and they are doable. Then you do have the two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way upwards like so. Then we get to what I consider to be the only joints on the figure that are a little bit tough, which are the wrists. They are fully able to rotate 360 on both, but the one that is the open hand barely nudges inwards and outwards at all. It's only the one that has the holding position, so to speak, that is able to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to pivoting inwards and outwards versus the other ones. So that's something that, again, the mileage may vary depending on your figure. And then you could say that the torso is just a tiny bit arguable because you are able to slightly crunch forward, especially when you take the neck joint into account, to be able to kind of give him, like I said, a shrugging, kind of looking at you kind of look to make him look a little bit scarier. And because of that, the torso is able to crunch slightly inwards, but it's not the most satisfying one. Slight extension towards the top, but because of the way that this overall tunic is going to be holding things kind of downwards, you're not really seeing an awful lot of flexibility. Decent crunching from side to side on the obliques, but you actually do have a waist joint that is able to fully rotate. Just be mindful of the coat that is coming down from the bottom, as well as the only thing that I would have complained if this was any other figure, which is the diaper. You can actually see that this time around, I've seen other people mention this about McFarlane's before, despite having a great overall design that is able to somewhat mitigate this because of the way that Batman Who Laughs is designed with this coat kind of covering it all and obscuring it. If you were to pull away the coat, you can see that this time around I will give some criticisms to the diaper. I do think that it's a little oversized. Generally, this doesn't really call too much my attention when it comes to McFarlane's, but this time I did manage to take notice of it. If it wasn't for, and I would have probably given it some more demerits off of the points for this figure if it wasn't for the design of the coat for Batman Who Laughs completely covering it, and them getting lucky, essentially, is what happened here. But once you get to the top legs, you are able to move them all the way upwards to about that point right there, and not much to go back, except it is kind of pushing beyond the limits of other McFarlane's slightly, because you do see it kind of breaking away from there. Unfortunately, not much in the way of leg extensions, unless you are, actually, never mind. If you get the legs through this little cutout inside of the coat, you can actually get extension pretty decently right about right there. So never mind, you can actually do just a little bit of magic there. Then you do get to the knees that are fully able to bend, except just a word of caution, because of the coat, it's gonna come in the way, so it's gonna be a little bit difficult to get any sort of posability or bendability with the knees. But more so than that, they sculpted the knees in a very weird way to get it to happen, to where you'll see a piece right here that for a moment scared me into thinking that it broke, but it's actually part of the sculpting. So don't fret if you see this piece kind of poking out from underneath the part that you know is intentional, which is this little spike covering up the knee joint, or what would be like a knee guard, so to speak. You have this little piece on the side, and at first I thought it was a defect on my figure, but once I fleshed it back into place, I noticed that that piece just fit very snugly right there on top of the knee right there. So that's actually part of the design, and I noticed that the same thing happens on the other knee, so it's actually something that they just probably needed to compromise in order to get the knee to fully bend, while at the same time creating the creases of the pants be fruitful, and to actually make it happen so that it still looks like Noob Saibot instead of just a full-on decked out Batman Who Laughs. Once we move down to the ankles, though, we do get to the typical ball joints. So sadly, none of those ankles that I really like that most contemporary McFarlane's have been using, with the halfway cut in the middle portion. So this is just your typical ball joint that is able to fully rotate 360 degrees and slightly pivot upwards and downwards, even though the movement is a little bit limited by the way that the boot is overall designed. And you do get toesies, but because they're those really husky boots, you don't really get an awful lot of movement with the toes all the way upwards unless you give them a very firm press. So not much really to write home about there, but again, those really fluid arms, as well as the way that the head is able to complement the character, is able to make up for that. So for my money, that would actually really about it if this was a traditional Batman Who Laughs figure, but it is technically the Mortal Kombat equivalent of Noob Saibot wearing the skin. So he technically had to come with an accessory that favors that character and that line that you would typically not find on a DC Multiverse. So outside of the absent trading card, but the included base, you do get Noob Saibot's hook, right here. And it's decently sculpted and painted with the silver chrome, as well as what looks to be like a strap or amongst the hilt right there that's kind of wrapped around. So you get a little bit of texturing there to make it look like it's something that's very holdable. Getting it to be plied into the holding hand, which is going to be the left one, is sometimes, it was a challenge at first, but I think once you press it in at least once, it kind of fleshes a little easier because of the way that it was able to slightly open up the hand a little bit easier. So there you go. It just kind of popped into place a lot easier than I actually honestly thought it would be. But there you have pretty much the entire ensemble that you get out of the MK11 Batman Who Laughs skin for Noob Saibot. But overall, this is definitely one of the greatest surprises in recent memory, because being that it was coming from the Mortal Kombat 11 line and not necessarily DC Multiverse, I somewhat had low expectations, to be brutally honest. But I think it's because of those low expectations that I ended up really enjoying this figure. Albeit a little bit of the articulation could have been done a little bit better, as well as some of the argued stances on what those shoulders can really do for a collector as far as posing. But for me, I'd say they leaned more so towards the positive side. They kind of lended to the freakishness of the character. Could have done with some better accessories, whether it be alternate hands or just something that was more Batman related as opposed to Noob Saibot related. But overall, I'd say I am definitely satisfied with this figure, and is definitely a worthwhile addition to the collection. I give the Batman Who Laughs from the Mortal Kombat 11 McFarlane line an 8 out of 10. And he technically has Batman in the title, so he's definitely a contender for possibly hitting the top 5 Batman McFarlanes for the end of the year, or in the new ranking whenever I get the chance to shoot that video. And if you guys want to get one of my more recommendable Batman McFarlane figures, do so by hitting the link in the description below that will take you on over to Big Bat Toy Store. They are ready to ship, or you can add it to your pile of loot and add them to your collection, and it helps out the channel in the process. Otherwise, guys, my question to you will have to be, what was your biggest surprise as far as your collection is concerned, whether it be with McFarlane toys, Marvel Legends, or anything else that is part of your collectibles series? What was the one thing that you looked at and said, I don't know about this? Brought them home, opened it up, played with it, and thought to yourself, hey, wait, hold up. Like, wait a minute, am I really gonna end up keeping this? For me, it's between this and Marvel Legends Iron Spider. Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, hit the thumbs down if you didn't, and you guys know the drill. Stay humble. I'll see you later.